On October 30th, 2024, Nintendo announced and released an app for Android and iOS titled Nintendo Music. It provides anyone with a Nintendo Switch Online membership access to stream soundtracks from a selection of Nintendo's games. As someone interested in video game music, seeing a release like this at this time is somewhat unexpected. Around February 2022, Nintendo went after one of the largest YouTube channels hosting a variety of their music, Gilva Sunner. Over 2,000 videos were claimed and had viewing access blocked worldwide, which led to his decision to take down his whole channel. Although this wasn't the first time Nintendo went after a YouTube channel hosting their music, this time in particular brought Nintendo a lot of negative press and led to people questioning the motives behind this high-profile takedown. People have been suggesting for years that Nintendo should distribute their music to digital streaming platforms, or even make their own, but that was the last time that thought seemed to be widely circulating in the public, so the timing of this app made it a bit of a surprise. It is exciting to see Nintendo show some care to their soundtracks, but there are some issues with the app itself and some of the music included, leaving me with mixed feelings about it all. First, I'll go over the app and how it works, then we'll take a closer look at the technical details of some of the music on it, and finally I'll give my thoughts and some critiques of the app as a whole. The app is available for Android and iOS, and can be downloaded from the Google Play Store or Apple's App Store. When you first load it, you'll be asked to log into your Nintendo account and may face some impossible captchas along the way. Once you're logged into your account, as long as you have any type of Nintendo Switch Online membership, you should be able to immediately use the app. You'll be greeted with many different ways to listen to the music available. There's lots of playlists based on different series, characters, moods, and other themes. You can also search for or view all of the games they currently have music for. They launched with 23 soundtracks available, and I've added 7 more between launch and me recording this. That adds up to well over 2,000 tracks, and they intend to add more over time, with some sneak peeks of future additions shown in the trailer. The music player has a nice selection of features you'd expect, like adding to favorites, custom playlists, repeat, and shuffle, but the showcase feature is being able to extend a track. It allows you to seamlessly loop eligible tracks to 15, 30, or 60 minutes long. You can also download tracks for offline playback, though of course they can only be played back via the app, and are both hidden and encrypted on your device. All the tracks are properly titled, and on top of there being album cover art, there's artwork for each individual track, often in the form of a game screenshot if there isn't another obvious choice. If you tap your profile at the top right while at the home page, you'll find these settings. There isn't too much to see here, but under playback and downloads, you'll find the quality settings. There's 3 to choose from: high quality, balanced, and data saving. The app's FAQ states that high quality has a bitrate around 320 kilobits per second, balanced with 192, and data saving at 64, all using a basic AAC codec. The high quality and balanced qualities are very similar. They both preserve content up to 20 kHz, which is the upper limit of human hearing, and the vast majority of people wouldn't be able to hear a difference in distortions or artifacts. On the other hand, the data saving quality only retains frequencies up to 13 kHz, which is quite low. Many people can hear well past that, giving it that mid-2000s internet sound. The last feature I'll go over is spoiler prevention, which can also be found in the settings. It allows you to add games of your choosing to a list, and it'll avoid showing any information or music from the games added to it. Good for something like avoiding spoilers from one of the pre-made playlists. Now let's take a closer look at some of the music that's actually here. I'll mostly be going over things that stand out, like cases of missing tracks, as well as some more technical aspects like any quality issues, version differences, and track or recording sources. You may need headphones to hear differences in some comparisons, but don't worry if they're hard to tell either way. On a surface level, the games that are here seem to have the majority of their music included. They often include things like variations, fanfares, and jingles, which I think is good because I'd rather have and not need. One game here that I think gives us some insight is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This is one of those Nintendo 64 games that got a high-effort official soundtrack release on CD, and a lot of the tracks on it sound different compared to the music from the actual game. For example, here's the house theme from in-game compared to this soundtrack. The OST version sounds more staccato and is sped up a bit. Although there are some issues with this version, mostly stemming from having to fit this whole soundtrack on one CD, I don't disagree with Nintendo's decision to use it here. Many other soundtracks in Nintendo music use their OST versions too, like Yoshi's Island, Tomodachi Collection, and others I'll talk about shortly. However, sometimes a game's official soundtrack is not only substandard, but can have major issues. This is the case with Donkey Kong Country 2. The version included in Nintendo music seems to be based specifically off of Super Donkey Kong 2 Dixie and Diddy original sound version, catalog number PSCN 5049, with some attempts to fix it. That's because this release is plagued with a major issue. Every track is panned heavily to the left. It's not just a simple pan adjustment either. Whatever they did to cause this lost a lot of stereo information in the process. This is noticeable in the track Sticker Push Symphony, also known as any of these titles on screen. The filtered bass sound uses an effect where on the last two notes of every, whenever it decides, it flips the phase of only one of the left or right channels, which results in it sounding like it's behind you. In the PSCN 5049 release, the bass sound disappears from the left channel when it does that effect. The version in Nintendo Music attempts to fix this release by panning the tracks a bit more to the right, although I think they still sound too heavy to the left. This of course doesn't bring back the information lost, which in this example is the bass in the left channel. But how do I know this is a case of information being lost? There's actually a clean recording of this same version from the US soundtrack release, which has none of the panning issues and preserves the bass's effect. Even looking at the US release with those issues fixed, there's still some things about it I don't really care for, like the change in tone and articulation in the filtered chords in Sticker Push Symphony. Or the really cheesy spring reverb used, which is more noticeable in the drums. Overall, it is disappointing to see how the soundtrack for this game was handled in Nintendo Music. I get they tried to make it work, but this game is home to some of Nintendo's best music of all time. This is something they really needed to get right. Also briefly, the soundtrack for the first Donkey Kong Country in Nintendo Music uses a similar OST release by the same label, but doesn't contain any of the same issues. It's generally more faithful to how the music sounds in-game, but it is a fair bit darker. While there are other cases of OST releases having major issues as a whole, some have issues that are more isolated or subtle, but are still present enough to stand out. This is the case with Super Mario Galaxy, which is also included in Nintendo Music using its OST version. File Select is the worst offender with two notable issues, first being distortions. On the louder piano notes, you can hear distortions that aren't present in the original game. I'm not sure where the distortion's coming from. It happens at different peaks and during the fadeout, so I don't think it's something like digital clipping on the master. The second issue is the strange way they handle the variation in this track. In-game, once you select a planet, drums are added into the mix. Some soundtrack releases may handle a case like this by making the variation with the drums a separate additional track, and others might decide to make a medley by bringing in the drums on the next loop in the same track. Galaxy's OST does the latter, but for some reason it fades out immediately after bringing the drums in. In fact, fadeouts are a bit of an inconsistency across this whole soundtrack. Many tracks here fade out before the loop while there's still parts playing that you would expect to play out. Meanwhile, others begin the fade out after the loop, which is more common and feels more natural. Despite most soundtracks in Nintendo music using their OST versions where available, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe doesn't seem to. The music here for all of the courses from the base game have a steep falloff at 16 kHz, which could be expected from the in-game files for these tracks since they have a sample rate of 32 kHz. Meanwhile, the OST retains the full 22 kHz spectrum on these tracks that you'd expect from a CD. The Booster Course Pass tracks have a higher sample rate in-game, so it's harder to tell if they use different sources there. For some of the menu tracks, they used higher quality versions than the ones found in-game, and the fade-outs differ from the OST release, so it's possible they might have had access to only some of these source files. I just can't find an obvious reason why they might intentionally opt for lower quality versions. Quality of the music that is here aside, there's about 5 tracks missing, which isn't too bad given there's around 150 tracks total in-game, but it's still more than 0. I suspect most of these were intentionally left out, since 4 of the 5 are just an existing track but with an added looping chant. These variations include Dragon Palace Outside, Wildwood's Shy Guys, Wii Wario's Gold Mine Miners, and Shy Guy Falls Miners. The last missing track is the F-Zero variation of the Race Start fanfare, but I don't think it was left out intentionally since every other Race Start variation was included. One last quirk with this game is they added the same track twice, Wario Stadium and Waluigi Pinball. Although they're different courses in-game, their music is identical, and so are the tracks here besides encoding artifacts. The Wii Channels are a really interesting inclusion here for many reasons. Of course, with the Wii selling as well as it did, and tracks like the Mii Channel and Wii Shop Channel themes becoming widely known, it's a no-brainer for Nintendo to include something like this. But we also get a lot of slightly underrated gems, like music from the News Channel and Check Me Out Channel. If you're deeply familiar with the music from the Wii, you'll immediately notice that something's different about the versions present in Nintendo music. It can be seen almost right away with the Wii menu. It sounds more stereo and the sign instruments are more clicky. Subtle differences like that are seen throughout this whole soundtrack, but some of the differences are less neutral and in some cases blurs the line between indifferent and destructive, like with the Wii Shop Channel theme. The start of the song is iconic. It draws your attention with loud chords from the main organ lead, along with a boomy kick and bass. In the original, this section is substantially louder than the rest of the song, so it's understandable why Nintendo might see this as problematic in a listening-focused environment. Say you have your volume adjusted to your liking, and then this track comes on. With the in-game version, you either could get blasted with the loudness of the intro while having the rest sound normal, or you could have the whole track turned down to compensate for the intro with the rest of it quiet. But they decided to even the two sections out by driving the intro into a limiter. Since the bass is louder than the organ, the limiter pushes the entire song down while the bass is hitting its threshold, making the organ quieter during the bass, and as the bass goes away, the organ gets louder again. Simply put, this is not a great way to address this issue. Something like an automated gain adjustment on the master would have been fast to implement while sounding better than only letting the limiter push everything down, since the gain adjustment would bring down the volume of everything consistently. This version of the Wii Shop Channel differs from the original in other ways too. The bass guitar is quieter, the high end is boosted, and the reverb sounds different. This version is most similar to the one present in Touch Generation's soundtrack, a Wii and DS compilation CD distributed by the Japanese Club Nintendo. Although these two aren't identical, the Touch Generations version doesn't try to reduce the dynamic range in the intro at all, and has other minor technical differences, such as the waves of some instruments not quite lining up. Something else I noticed in the Wii Channel tracks here is they have unique content in higher frequencies than the Wii was originally capable of outputting. Before the digital to analog conversion process, the Wii outputs digital audio at 32 kHz, meaning there's no unique audio content past 16 kHz. But most tracks here have unique content up to 20 kHz, which is the hard cutoff for everything in this app. It's harder to tell in some tracks, but it's clear in others, like Photo Channel Selecting Photos, where the pitches of the piano's tines are consistent past 16 kHz and don't match how aliasing would look. Speaking of aliasing, many individual instruments in the versions here have audible aliasing that wasn't present on the original console. In the Photo Channel track Digital Camera / Cell Phone, you can hear some pretty obnoxious aliasing around 7 kHz when the low string comes in on the second chord. This can be the result of a sample being played at a low pitch, or sample rate, and not having adequate interpolation or filtering. In some tracks, there's instruments or drums that give the impression the track contains only aliasing past 16 kHz, but every instance seems to have unique information from other elements if you look closer. With this and some of the other differences, it makes me wonder how these versions were produced. Both the Wii and PC sound players from the development kit these channels were made with have a cutoff at 16 kHz, and the reverb used in the Nintendo Music versions sounds nothing like the reverb from the original engine. So despite some other claims floating around, I suspect these were produced in a proper digital audio workstation. Maybe they're even the original arrangements the composers of these songs made before they were implemented with the development kit. Although, while most of the tracks here are new versions, there are a few outliers, most of which are in the Everybody Votes channel. At the start of the track Voter Data, you can hear the sound effect of a walking me that plays when you click on the Voter Data button in-game. In the track Suggest a Question, which comes immediately after, you can also hear a zap sound effect, along with the tail of the sound from clicking the button to go to suggest a question. These sound effects naturally play in-game, but you wouldn't expect to see them in a soundtrack release, and as far as I can tell, you don't in other tracks. Also, unlike other tracks, the reverb in both of these match the in-game reverb. The last outlier for this channel is its banner theme. All three of these tracks have a fall-off at 16 kHz and match an EQ curve against a Wii U HDMI output perfectly, though they still could be from another source. These tracks share an unfortunate trait as well, with all of them having a type of artifacting where transients, like the attack of most drums, sound like they're being faded into, along with the high-end sounding like it's encoded with a low-quality codec. I really tried, but I wasn't able to come close to replicating this kind of artifacting through a wide variety of things. My guess is it could be some kind of an attempt at enhancement, or maybe it was recorded with a low-quality capture device, but it's hard to say for sure. Also, the channel banner theme from the Photo Channel shares the same cutoff in the high end, but since there's no sharp transients in it, it's harder to tell if it suffers from this artifacting. To end this section off, the thing I'm most sad about here is the lack of several channels with amazing soundtracks. The obvious one missing to me is the Nintendo channel, but there's a lot of other lesser known ones like the Wii Speak channel, Food Delivery channel, Wii Room, and a handful of others. But overall, I am happy to see new versions of the channels we did get. Wii Sports is the third soundtrack added to Nintendo Music after its launch. It's a classic and I'm glad to see it here. Like with the Wii channels, the music here is higher quality than the files found in the game, having unique content up to 20 kHz. After seeing it added, the first thing I went to check was the bowling theme. In-game, the track has heavy reverb applied via the sound engine, but the audio file itself is pretty clean. In later Wii Sports titles, they started rendering the audio file with the heavy reverb already included, so I was wondering what they would do for this track in Nintendo Music. They did only include the clean version, which I think is fine since it's just nicer to listen to casually. Going back to the soundtrack as a whole, there are some mild inconsistencies as for which tracks they decided to include. All of the Wii channels had their channel banner themes, but Wii Sports is missing its own here. A few fanfares are missing as well, but frankly I don't think those are a huge deal. I'm not sure if I could say this next track is missing or not, because while it is in the game's files, it was seemingly never used. It's commonly referred to as Wii Fitness Menu, not to be confused with the track sharing the same title in Nintendo Music. Although this was close to being a really good soundtrack release, one of the tracks does have an issue that's hard to ignore. In the track main menu, there's some pretty heavy distortion when the sine wave instrument comes in that isn't present in the original game. It isn't distorted during the fade out, so it looks like something went wrong on the master. I can recreate the distortion spot on by taking the in-game version and simply driving the gain up 4 dB, letting it digitally clip. At the moment, Metroid Prime is the only GameCube game present in Nintendo Music. Unfortunately, it is missing quite a few tracks. There's currently 36 present, but there's anywhere around 60 to 70 in the original game, depending on if you want to include things like demo disc variations and trailer music. At best, we're still missing a large fraction of the music from the game. This seems to be because, like many of the other soundtracks here, they're using the OST version, which is missing a lot of tracks, likely due to disk space. Although there's still a few missing in Nintendo Music that were present on the CD. A lot of the missing tracks in general are more atmospheric, but they definitely still have musical elements to them, and I do think they should have been added. Similarly to Metroid Prime, Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade is the only Game Boy Advance soundtrack available at this time. Yet again, an OST version is used here. I initially wasn't going to mention it, but after trying to fully listen through it, I felt like I had to. Even for a GBA soundtrack, this release is unusually grating to listen to. To keep it simple, this game, like many others on the system, plays at a low sample rate and bit depth, resulting in a lot of noise and aliasing. That on its own I don't mind, but in this release they took out a lot of the high end, which I think somehow actually makes it more fatiguing to listen to. Here's a comparison between my GBA, Nintendo Music, and a clean version from AGB Play. When I originally saw the NES and Game Boy soundtracks, my first thought was to find out the source of the recordings, whether they were emulated or from real hardware. This is hard to confirm beyond a doubt due to real hardware having a wide variety of tones, noise, and other characteristics, along with the possibility of them using noise removal. But regardless, I think the soundtrack of Super Mario Bros. Here may be comprised of different sources. The normal, non-sped up tracks look like they could be emulated due to them sounding relatively clean and showing no signs of a buzz or whine, except for a single tone around 8 kHz occasionally. The sped up tracks, on the other hand, show both the buzz and 15.8 kHz whine that could be expected from real hardware. The buzz isn't as loud as the systems I compared against, but every system I've analyzed was very different. Interestingly, it seems they were conscious of the mixing in the soundtrack. The underground theme is a bit unbalanced in-game, with the triangle bass overpowering the square leads. In the Nintendo Music release, it looks like they EQ'd the mids and highs up to compensate. I think the highs are a bit much here since the triangle's top end is getting overly boosted, but it's passable for a quick fix. As for the Game Boy soundtracks, neither Dr. Mario nor Kirby's Dream Land show any signs of a real hardware recording in general, so I think it's likely they're emulated. Metroid with its two versions is a notable inclusion because it's one of the handful of NES games that had a Famicom Disk System release. This add-on is a Japanese exclusive drive that attaches underneath a Famicom console to read Nintendo's spin on a floppy disk. A lot more could be said, but what makes it important here is it has a chip that adds a wavetable-based channel that can be used as an additional instrument along with all the sounds the base NES sound chip can produce. This new channel allows for a custom 64x64 wavetable to be played, so you can make a sawtooth, sine wave, another square, or anything you want. With there only being mainly 3 melodic channels on base NES hardware, an addition like this doesn't go unappreciated. As for the music in the FDS version of Metroid, not a whole lot is different. Only 4 tracks use this extra channel at all, with the rest sounding essentially the same as the later NES release. Here's the ending theme of each version. As for the recording sources, the FDS version has a buzz and whine during gaps, but the US version doesn't. Now to dive into my general thoughts and criticisms, along with some other issues that aren't game specific. The first thing that stood out to me after trying the app for the first time was of course the lack of music. I'm aware they're adding more over time and at a somewhat decent pace so far with around 6 new soundtracks added already, but Nintendo has a massive catalog of music from their games, and launching with just 23 soundtracks from them is criminal. I do think the games they chose were fine if they could only add that many, but I would have liked to see at least double or triple this catalog at launch. There's just so many classic soundtracks missing, like the majority of the mainline Super Mario and Zelda games, not to mention countless other series. I wonder if it's an intentional move by Nintendo to get people excited and coming back for new releases, but I question if taking it to this extreme was such a good idea. I guess it depends on their motives behind this app. It's clear Nintendo is aware that people like music from Nintendo games, and they know people are listening to it a lot on places like YouTube. With that in mind, the question is, are they trying to replace that unofficial market, or are they just treating this like a novelty to add value to Nintendo Switch Online? If they are trying to make Nintendo music the main place people listen to their music, they have an awful long way to go. For the sake of discussion, and with them being hostile towards uploads of their music in the past, I'll assume that's their goal. As we've seen with Steam, it's possible to make a platform that provides a better experience to paying customers than the alternatives. Unfortunately, I don't think Nintendo Music is a better experience than accessing their music through countless other means. For streaming, people widely use YouTube, which allows them to access much more of Nintendo's music, along with almost all other music in general. Nintendo's app naturally can't have that convenience and thus limits the average user in comparison. This is largely why some people were wanting Nintendo's music distributed on a platform like Spotify. The same also goes for the various alternative ways you can listen to Nintendo's music offline, with the potential for even more benefits through alternative means. As it stands, the only thing the Nintendo Music app uniquely has to offer is higher quality or unreleased versions of some of their music, and potentially some unique accessibility for extended tracks. Much else is compromised, leaving the average user with a worse experience and less accessibility. For example, it's nice that they have an app for mobile devices, but they really should add some kind of desktop solution, whether it be dedicated software or just a web app. On top of that, it'd be nice to see some support for the Nintendo Switch, especially since listening to music on it can already be done with Homebrew, even while in-game. But in regards to accessibility, the biggest letdown has to be the lack of any kind of loudness normalization. When you have music from all kinds of sources and time periods, they're bound to come in a large variety of loudness. Some songs might have a modern master catered towards being loud, while others might be much more quiet, even having excessive volume headroom. This can be an issue because if you're trying to listen to these songs in a playlist, for example, you may have severe differences in loudness between some tracks. One might come on that's quiet, so you turn your volume up to hear it better, then the next one comes on and blasts your ears out. Platforms like Spotify solve this by calculating the loudness of every song in a measurement called LUFS, or LUFS. When the user has loudness normalization enabled, it sets the volume of each song played so its output is equal to a set LUFS value, resulting in every song roughly playing at the same loudness. The lack of any kind of loudness normalization is a big problem in Nintendo music because the music here has a very large range of loudness. The most extreme example I could find is the difference between Battle Team Star from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and Q&A from Tomodachi Collection. That battle theme comes in at negative 6.4 LUFS, which is relatively loud, and Q&A comes in at negative 30.8. That is an incredibly large difference in loudness. Although that's the most extreme example I've found, this issue is still noticeable while casually using the app, especially in things like theme-based playlists that include music from a variety of games. It's a shame because Nintendo is well aware of this and mentions it in their FAQ, but they basically tell the user to just deal with it. One of the features I think is done pretty well here is the ability to extend tracks. I think it shows Nintendo has been paying at least a little bit of attention with how many 30-minute or hour-plus extended versions of Nintendo's music exists on YouTube. I listened through almost every extended track, besides most of the Switch games, and the majority were fine, but I did find 4 tracks with bad loop points, all of which were in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the track Flying Fairy, the loop is slightly mistimed, resulting in the glockenspiel instrument overlapping itself out of sync while the loop fades between points. With the other 3 tracks, which are Zelda's theme, Kakariko Village Orchestra, and Reuniting with Zelda, the mistimed loops cause more of a tremble to the pitch of the lead instruments when they happen. I'd imagine this to be an easy fix, so it's likely these and any other loop issues may be fixed in the future. A common complaint I've seen is that not every track is eligible to be extended, but from what I can tell, the ones that can't are usually due to them originally not being made to loop or having some other problem. A good example is cutscene music in general. This kind of music is made to progressively follow a visual cutscene and often will have a clear end to the track, not just a loop that fades out. It's understandable why these can't be extended, because it either means you loop a section that doesn't include a fair portion of the track, probably still not seamlessly, or you try to include most of the track with a very obvious and unpleasant loop. At that point, you may as well set the track to repeat. An example of a track that originally does loop in-game but can't be extended in Nintendo music is yet again Super Mario Galaxy's File Select. With a lot of game music, when a track loops for the first time, even if it sounds like it's looping to the very start, it's often not. This is because a track naturally may have either reverb tails or a fading release from the instruments that were playing just before, still audible at the start of the composition's loop. The loop point will often be set a little ahead to give room for everything to become consistent, allowing for a truly seamless loop. And not only that, but with File Select in particular, the start of the compositional loop plays different notes than the start of the track. So because the version of File Select here immediately brings drums in on the first compositional loop just to fade the track out immediately, an attempt at looping the first part results in an imperfect loop. To be honest, I don't think most people would care or even notice in this particular instance, but it's understandable why Nintendo might. Something else that stands out to me is what they're choosing to put resources into. They're adding dedicated cover art for each individual track, which really adds up with huge soundtracks like Animal Crossing New Horizons, but yet they can't seem to be bothered adding any kind of composer or producer credits. This is something fan-made game rips have been doing for decades at this point, and it comes off as disrespectful to the original artist that they can't at least add credits on a per-game basis, especially since many, if not all of the original CD OST versions used in Nintendo music have those credits on their back or in their booklets. When there's this much of a disparity in efforts, I have to assume it's an intentional choice. But something cool we're getting out of this app is a lot of new official track titles. Previously, and still even now, you could only listen to most of Nintendo's music through unofficial means. Official track titles generally aren't public or may not even exist for much of Nintendo's music. Many fans had to think up their own titles, with different people having different ways of coming up with them. If you're interested in this topic, I suggest checking out GST Channel's video on it. As for track titles in other languages, based on the Spanish Nintendo Music trailer, it seems that some track titles are translated while others aren't. Now for the album cover art, having the square album-sized art for the Switch games is pretty cool, but every other soundtrack besides the Wii Channels is just the game's box art. It's not like it's a bad choice. It makes sense for something like showing box art in the language or region of the user, but with many of the soundtracks here using their OST versions, I think it would be cool to have some alternative cover art from those physical releases. Maybe even something like an artwork section where a soundtrack could have all of the art from its OST release, like the booklets and such. Going back to the music selection, I think we have some cool stuff now, but there's some particular soundtracks I'm really hoping to see in the future. My number one pick would be Super Paper Mario, and specifically in its original quality. Most of its soundtrack only exists in the way it was packaged in the game, at a sample rate of 22.05 kHz. That only contains content up to 11,025 Hz, which is less than the lowest quality in this app. There's plenty of other games with this issue that could benefit as well, like Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon, Mario & Luigi Dream Team, and Pokemon Cafe Mix. While there have been a few cases of us seeing higher quality versions of a game's soundtrack already, there might be some scenarios where that's not the case. So far, it seems when an official soundtrack version of a game exists, they usually opt to use it. But like with Donkey Kong Country 2, there's some soundtracks where I think any other option would be way better. One game that comes to mind here is Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. The official soundtrack seems to be recorded from a real Game Boy Advance console and contains a very audible 60Hz hum across all the tracks from the game. To be fair, you could argue this is accurate, because the real game cartridge in a Game Boy Advance does produce an unusually loud 60Hz hum, just like in this release, but I still would probably prefer to listen to a version without it. The last thing I want to touch on is what this app could mean for the existence of Nintendo's music elsewhere. There's a lot of fear going around of what Nintendo might do to uploads or usage of their music on various platforms, and understandably so given their past. However, I'm not yet convinced Nintendo's going to go on an all-out massive takedown spree like they do with ROMs of their newer generation games. First off, since I've seen the sentiment floating around, I don't think they would do something like adding their music to YouTube's Content ID system. Currently, a handful of it is kind of in there, but most of it is ignorant or potentially malicious people distributing their cover music incorrectly. This results in automatic claims being made on usage of the original tracks due to matching against the same melodies used in the cover. But I generally don't think Nintendo will take down or claim content where people are just using their music as background music. The fallout and backlash would likely be more harmful than anything they could ever gain from doing it. As for uploads of music from their games, I honestly don't think we're going to see an absolute crackdown by Nintendo, but I wouldn't be surprised if we still see casual action on easy targets. When they have taken action against uploads of their music in the past, it was mainly targeting one particular YouTube channel, with not much if anything outside of it being affected. You can still find thousands of iconic Nintendo songs on YouTube, some ranging back over 16 years. That's not to undermine the action they have taken. They did take down at least 5 big YouTube channels over the years, and it wasn't just for no reason, but they clearly have been letting a lot slide. For example, there's an infamous website named after a certain video game series that's known for hosting downloads of video game music. They're one of, if not the largest source online for game rips and official soundtrack rips. They even got big enough to attract Sega's attention, leading to over 500 albums being DMCA'd. I find it unlikely Nintendo doesn't know of them already, and they haven't taken action. At least, for now. Honestly, at this point, they kind of look like an easy target, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them take a hit. Overall, I was leaning towards Nintendo not taking too much action in general, and I still kind of am, but I did stumble across something concerning: a job listing on Nintendo's website for an intellectual property lawyer. This isn't alarming on its own, but under the summary of requirements, one of the points listed is,
"Strong experience with the protection of musical works and sound recordings is a plus."
So maybe this is the calm before the storm. But even if we see a wave of takedowns like we've never seen before, I'm still not too worried. Once something hits the internet, it's usually there forever. At the very least, I hope they don't hone in on soundtracks they don't intend to add, because I'm pretty sure they're never gonna get remotely close to adding their entire catalog to Nintendo music. Thanks for watching. I'm sure there's some interesting stuff I missed, and I know there's plenty I couldn't fit in, so if you found anything else notable, feel free to let me know in the comments. My next video should hopefully be a detailed look at a Nintendo system that has a pretty unique audio and music situation. Feel free to sub if you're interested in seeing it.